Welcome, everybody, to the QbDVision webinar on weaving the digital fabric of CMC. With all of the conversations underway today and the activities as well around digital transformation in biotech and pharma, we wanted to take this opportunity to surface a conversation around digital transformation, specifically for the CMC work streams. My name is Yash Sabrawal, and I'm the CEO and co-founder here at QbDVision. I'm going to spend a few minutes today walking you through some of our strategies and approaches to build that digital fabric for CMC. And then my colleague, Luke Guerrero, who's our Chief Operating Officer, will take you into a deeper dive of our software platform and some of the activities to actually build that digital fabric. So our purpose at QbDVision is simple. We are a company developing software solutions to accelerate your breakthroughs and get your products to market faster. As a former chief operating officer of a pharma company myself, I struggled with the challenges of managing all of your information that you're generating over the CMC lifecycle. And so we're going to spend some time today talking about how we built a software solution to help alleviate some of those challenges and get you past those pain points to get your products to market faster.
So we're going to start out quickly, just have a little fun with a quick poll. Within your organizations or for you yourself today, how much time do you currently spend searching for or manually assembling any form of CMC information in reports? I'd love to hear your answers. We'll share them quickly. Once we're done, we'll give participants about 15 more seconds to respond, and then we'll share the results. All right, let's see how we did. Okay, some good results there, kind of mixed across the board. Some folks, we definitely need to define the term CMC for you. So it's chemistry, manufacturing, controls. It's sort of the summarization of all information that's ultimately going to end up in a filing. But some great info here, and it's kind of supporting the fact that digital transformation is underway within our industry. And I think that the topic of the webinar today is around the concept of a digital fabric. And a digital fabric is an important tool in digital transformation. And so what is it? And there's several industry definitions that we've put up here on screen from Gartner, from Forrester, and even from our friends at Excendia that have a more localized definition for the pharmaceutical space, which we could go through. And we're going to spend a lot of time. Yash is going to go through this in detail and breaking it down for practitioners within our space. But it's also interesting to sort of define it in terms of what it's not. And sort of the prevailing winds, if you will, in our industry over the last, let's call it 5 years, have really focused, what we've heard a lot of is data warehousing strategies, be it a data lake, a data ocean, a data pond. A lot of the industry seems to be going down the path of warehousing as a solution to some of the challenges that are faced around data. Now, warehousing is a valid solution. It's a little bit of an older solution for certain types of problems, but it isn't a panacea for a broader industry such as ours. It's not going to solve all the challenges. And in other industries, stats are as high as 80% of warehousing projects fail. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? And one viewpoint here, and which is where this fabric concept came from, it's not novel to pharma. It comes from other industries, is the evolution of warehousing, is that the idea that centralizing everything in a command and control response to how to organize information has some valid use cases, but also can fail at a really large scale. And what you really should do in the fabric concept is around focusing on people and process and helping tools connect together to weave through that information so that people can work in the right tool for the right job, but ultimately work in the tool that's going to provide that maximum context to what you're doing. So it's about connecting those siloed point solutions into something that is that's vertically integrated and pulling those pieces together. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Yash, who's going to bring this to life a little bit and kind of walk us through what that looks like in our space.
Thanks, Luke. So, if you're familiar with the chemistry, manufacturing, controls lifecycle and your overall development challenges, you will understand that this lifecycle is growing more complex by the day, especially as you think about advanced therapeutic medicinal products, cell therapies, gene therapies, personalized medicine. This is driving an ever-growing complexity of CMC activities, but you're still bound by the stages of process validation, which many of the regulatory agencies require. Now, what is that comprised of? Well, it's going to be comprised of a whole host of development activities that starts with early process development, moving into scale up and optimization, process characterization, ultimately commercial transfer, and then demonstrating that you have process control with your PPQ manufacturing. And as you're developing all this, undergoing all these development activities, you're generating a lot of information. And of course, you're supposed to be developing a control strategy framework alongside and in alignment with your development activities. But as we all know, it's very challenging to manage this control strategy framework development in alignment with your development activities. And there tends to be a lot of misalignment, and the control strategy framework is often developed in an ad hoc way, which then leads to additional challenges as you're doing all this work. Of course, all of this has to be done for everything that you make, whether you're making your raw materials, your master cell banks, your working cell banks, your input materials, your buffers, your media. And then, of course, as you go into drug substance and drug product development from upstream to downstream, all of these development activities and control strategy framework have to be managed for every single one of these. And so this is really where the challenge is today, managing all this information as you generate it, being able to find it when you need it. And of course, this leads to further challenges with tech transfer as you move from one site or one scale to another. This happens multiple times over the life cycle, and it's a major operational bottleneck. And one of the reasons for that bottleneck is just a lack of a transparent knowledge base that you can use to drive your activities going forward. So, there's no unified knowledge base for CMC today. Our knowledge base consists of documents, spreadsheets, notebooks, emails, people's tacit knowledge, and information, in siloed software solutions, which is challenging because this information isn't integrated and often not structured either. So all of this, sort of disparate and unintegrated knowledge leads to the unstructured data problem. And this is getting worse because CMC data is growing exponentially as we move into more digitalized, systems. We have, machines and bioreactors and sensors all able to pump out data. We're generating a lot of CMC data these days, but still 70 to 80% of this data is unstructured. And the challenge with unstructured data is that a majority of unstructured data is never utilized. So you generate all this data, but you don't really use it because you can't find it. And that's really the challenge of today, where you're wasting a lot of time searching for information because you're pulling a lot of data together, putting it in a warehouse, but there's no context around that information, so you can quickly identify it and utilize it as you need it. This leads to a whole host of operational inefficiencies. It's obviously slowing down your development time. It's dragging out tech transfers past 18 months. It extends your preparation times for your IND and BLA submission, especially Module 2 and Module 3. But more importantly, it creates a lack of CMC agility, and it inhibits your development of your institutional knowledge, which is critical these days as people move around more frequently from one organization to another. And you need to retain the information and the understanding that's developed while people are at your organization. So we put this slide together because one of the things that's often not clear to folks is just the breadth and depth of information that comprises the CMC universe. So people are often working in their individual areas. Maybe they're responsible for materials and material qualification, or they're responsible for doing risk assessments. But ultimately, there is a whole host, a very broad universe of information that's required that comprises your whole CMC program. And so we look at all these different areas, from templates to definitions, to risk assessments, to your resources and control strategies, and ultimately down into your characterization data, moving into tech transfer. What we do as organizations is we put together PDFs and Word documents and Excel spreadsheets for all of these different individual pieces of information. And then we dump them into SharePoints with the expectation that people will be able to find them and utilize this information. But the reality is that that doesn't work. And really this information is not integrated. None of these files are connected. You can't really share information very easily, and you certainly can't trace information very easily. So how do you figure out that if a material changes, that material is critical, and how do you trace what the impact of that is to either to your process or to your critical quality attributes that ultimately affect product safety and efficacy? And the answer is that you can't. And so you spend a lot of time pulling together SMEs, looking through reports, and trying to understand things that takes an inordinate amount of time. And this is really one of the big challenges of information management in the CMC space. So, our perspective is that one of the ways to address this challenge is really to build a unified knowledge base, which is powered by what we call a structured data platform. And so there's 4 pillars to our unified knowledge base. Really, you want to build a structured data platform that enables digital process management. It enables digital resource management. So we're talking about your materials, your equipment, your components, and so forth that these are the tangible assets that you use within your process. We're talking about managing your control strategy in a digital way, and ultimately managing your tech transfer digitally to avoid all of the current challenges that you have with document-based tech transfer. And the goal really here is to drive higher productivity in your organization, to facilitate collaboration, to really do a better job of controlling product quality as your process matures and scales towards commercialization. You want to be able to build institutional knowledge in a way that the knowledge becomes part of the organization and not just specific to individuals. You really want to be able to automate compliance and use all of these capabilities to get your CMC program moving more quickly and your products to market a lot faster. So as we think about this, we're sort of showing you a diagram here. On the left, you have a lot of unstructured data. And what you're trying to get to is this goal on the right, where you have a connected digital fabric that's weaved together that enables a lot of these 4 pillars that we've talked about, which is digital process management and control strategy and so forth. So how do you get from unstructured data to a digital fabric? And the goal really here is, first, you have to take this unstructured data and create digital objects. And we're going to talk a little bit more later in this presentation about how you do that. But the goal really here is to take the content that's in all these documents and really digitize it into individual objects. And then you can start to connect it to create these digital threads, right? And then of course, you have data in a lot of different places. So you have primary data in ELNs and in LIMS, and you've got analytics platform that has analyzed this data. You've got MES systems where the final output of your process development has to go into to drive your commercial manufacturing. And so the weaving part is really taking the digital objects and the connections that are put together via threads, then weaving it with your other data sources to really build that digital fabric that then enables these workflows of digital tech transfer, digital control strategy, and so forth. So where do we start? Well, let's start with the digital objects concept, right? We spend, the biotech and pharma world is still very document centric. Almost all the activities that we undertake are based on documents. We use documents really as databases, and then we index these documents in QMS systems and other systems with the hope that that is the approach that can get us where we need to go. And I think we've learned over the past 20 or 30 years that just doesn't really work very well. So, the goal here is to shift from document centric to content centric. And the way to do that is to stop really indexing your documents and indexing the content inside the documents. And that requires really pulling apart the information in your documents and categorizing them really as atomic data, as digital objects in a way that they make sense. So, categorizing equipment under an assets category or materials under a materials category, really breaking apart all the different elements of your process and your product requirements and your definitions into these individual data points, data objects, if you will, and then being able to link them together. So now you're starting to build traceability, and this is really the foundation of creating a structured data set. So again, not indexing documents, but indexing the content, and really leveraging that to build a structured data set, which then is your platform to move forward into the automations that are capable with that. So now if we come back to our universe of CMC information, we see that we can manage all of these different pieces of information instead of using spreadsheets and Word documents, but all as digital objects. And so when you put these together as digital objects, now we can build threads, which are really the connections between these individual data objects. So, if you have a quality attribute, you then utilize a risk assessment to figure out which attributes are CQAs. And of course, then this tells you what is important for product safety and efficacy. Being able to trace all this information and these justifications is really important, and digitizing them and then connecting them with these threads really enhances your ability to do this and creates the efficiencies around locating and managing this information going forward as you learn more about your process. So digital objects, connecting them creates your digital threads. And then we move into digital weaving. So the goal here really is not to be able to access or connect information in months, but to do it really in clicks. And so, we have QbDVision really has as its underlying foundation a data structure that's built on the FAIR principles. So findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. We connect all this information to really provide context, automation, and process intelligence. But also we have to respect the fact that there's a lot of information in other places, right? A lot of it is in paper. A lot of it is in other digital systems. And of course, ultimately, you also want, in many cases, to take all that digital information and reconstruct it in a document or report form, because that's still helpful to your operations. And so we've spent a lot of time not just building a solution that's a structured platform, but really thinking about how you can exchange your information from paper to digital, digital to digital, and then digital back to paper. So we're building tools to scan that allow you to scan and process and extract information directly from your reports and paper documents in a way that's digitized. Similarly, if you have primary data and other solutions such as ELN or LIMS, or you want to push our structured data into an MES implementation, we have data exchange technologies for that. And similarly, we have built some very robust data exchange tools to create what we call data link custom reports. So you can build a report within our platform, but link it to the data in our database, so it's automatically generating this report without you having to manually retype all this information. So there's a lot of power that comes with combining a well-structured digital platform with these data exchange technologies to build that overall CMC ecosystem and build that digital fabric for your operations. So ultimately, the digital fabric looks, something like this from a technology structure perspective. We believe that having a knowledge platform as the backbone of this digital fabric is critically important, because this is providing all that context information. It's providing, allowing you to really build a knowledge base and ultimately building intelligence around your activities, and also giving you the capability to automate a lot of the activities that are currently still manual. So, 20, 30 years ago, we saw the shift from paper into what we'd say electronic form, but electronic solutions were still very much paper on glass. And really now we're seeing the industry think about really shifting from electronic to digital. And now you can leverage that power of digital to really automate a lot of activities that are still very manual. So how does digital fabric drive operational efficiency? Well, as we mentioned, it has to start with a structured data framework. So structuring your data allows you to organize it, to link it, to find it, and ultimately utilize it. And these are some of the principles of the FAIR process. We build, and the goal really here is to get to a digital CMC workflows and regulatory content workflows. So, we've built digital exchange technologies that allow you to say export your process information to a B2MML format for MES integration, and to have an embedded document editor that allows you to create data link custom documents. We're also utilizing a lot of NLP and AI and ML tools that will allow you to scan information and extract information directly off of PDFs and other paper documents to take you in this direction of digital CMC and regulatory content workflows. So this is how it all comes together to weave your digital fabric from objects to threads to ultimately the digital fabric, and building these workflows for automation and greater efficiency. So at this point, I'll let Luke take over and talk a little bit more about how we do this very specifically.
Awesome. Thank you, Yash. And it's time for our second poll. Get excited. So there's currently a mandate to reduce tech transfer times. And what is that for your organization? Is there one? And it looks like we have some responses coming in already. So we see across the board, yes, in general, and some for 12 months and some no, not yet. So that's great to see. What we see, and certainly what we've seen from industry data, is that, and here in the center here, we have a report from our friends at McKinsey, where tech transfer takes on the median 18 to 24 months. So up to 2 years is the median estimate for the year, and it only goes there longer from there. So in some cases up to 3 years. So this is obviously a big area of opportunity for the industry. And it's really interesting because of a couple of reasons. Most notably, tech transfer is sort of is symbolic for a couple of problems that data fabric or digital fabric directly deals with, in the sense that it's the first time sometimes in your process that a lot of teams have to start to work together and have to start to integrate all the information that is being developed in the silos. You can kind of get away with just working in your LIMS system while maybe you're doing your DOE. You can kind of get away with working in your independent tools along the way. But as you move towards tech transfer, well, now you have to move that to another organization, another site, another scale, and you have to work together. So this information needs to come together. So when we look at the factors that drive some of these timelines, some are external. Biological complexity is certainly something that's going to be harder to control, or supply chains. Those are external typically to most organizations. But some are self-inflicted wounds. The document-based transfer that is done today, right? If you think about how information moves together, first off, internally, you spend a lot of time assembling that. Documents aren't generally good collaboration points. They're a good way to put a fine-tooth comb on things, but I'm sure almost everyone on this call has been through that authoring process. When you have V 1.3.5 point final, that's a pretty difficult way to collaborate. And we see in general the document-based transfer, where you're sending to receiving through an actual artifact that's on paper. You're taking a complex process, summarizing it into paper, and then on the other side, you're attempting to unpack that. And what do we see in practice? A lot of phone calls, a lot of information updates. So there's a lot of complexity in this process, and some of it is inherent and to the nature of what's being done, but some of it, as we stated, are self-inflicted wounds. So with that, I tee that up to show a little bit of a demonstration. So as Yash mentioned, now it's time to move to some fun parts and show you some stuff. And I'm going to dive into our software and show you how some of these topics can be applied, and talk about some of those exchange touch points where we can move data back and forth from other systems, and where those opportunities exist along the CMC frontiers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a process being created, and really the pillars of digital process management, ending and culminating in a process description, which is a highly typical output that's going to go up to regulatory. And then I'm going to talk through a transfer, right? And go through the creation of a sending site, the scaling, and then ultimately towards the validation, which is going to go down to manufacturing. When we think about information exchange, sometimes the areas where we are, maybe in manufacturing, things are more digital, although there still are a lot of paper batch records, so that's also important. But in regulatory, it's absolutely still paper. So as Yash mentioned, sometimes you can't escape can't escape the realities as much as you try to digitize around it. So we're going to show how all that works and comes together. So with that, I'm going to jump over into QbDVision. QbDVision is our cloud-based platform. It inherits a lot of the properties that Yash mentioned. And I'm going to show you our AMAB case study. Now, this is built upon the ISPE case study. This is sort of used across the board. It's almost now an industry standard. You see it in papers from PDA, Bioforum, all the industry groups sort of reference back to this. So we use it, and it's nice because we don't have to show any customer data, and we can really explain these concepts. Here I am on my digital product definition, which we're not going to go into, but I'm going to come over to our process definition. And first thing we're going to do is talk about setting that up. So the first thing you need to do is to start digital process management, if you will, is to create your process. Now, there's many different starting points that you could be in. You could have a legacy project process that already exists. It's got a batch record as its only artifact of it. You could have a brand new project that you're starting tomorrow where you're starting in digital and starting natively. But we've got different tools to get you set up. But the important thing is the first step is really starting to lay out what my process is. So you can see here, I've got my process definition. I have my unit operations for my upstream. So in this definition, I'm doing upstream. I'm laying out what they are. And now I'm starting to detail out and go unit operation by unit operation. How do I build this out, right? And in here, we're showing sort of, I'm going to drill into production culture of this upstream process. So that's your bioreactor step. And I'm going to show you some of the details within here. We're going to start to define our recipe, right? What is our process? But what are the equipment is used in our process? So starting to lay out the various pieces of equipment. We're going to, obviously in this step, of most notably, we're going to need that production bioreactor, right? We're going to need that larger scale vessel to do that expansion step. And then we're also going to need materials. So our anti-foam solution, our growth media, of course. And all of that, of course, comes together through our various parameters. So we'll have our various process parameters that we're going to be sort of documenting and setting up here. So we've got a number here, but as teams go through, we're starting to capture this information in the system. And of course, in certain cases, that's going to be brought in where it exists already. If it's on paper, we're going to be transposing it through some of the tools we have. And if it's already digital, then we can look to populate it in through some other technologies that we have. Here, as Joss mentioned, one of the threads was the parameter, right? So we have our definition of flow rate, right? A critical parameter for this operation. Now we're starting to find out what that is. So here you can see our definition of flow rate, the criticality assessment, which I'll get to in a minute, but really starting to capture what we know about that parameter today. So at this stage, and we're sort of later stage moving towards commercial, we know our NOR, we know our PAR, we know our failure rates, right? We're starting to get our monitoring down. We're looking at how we're going to control it. So all of this information, which might exist across a couple of different documents, a couple of different artifacts, is being centralized here within the platform. And that's where we're starting to build that knowledge. And as you go forward, right, as you start to capture just the general requirements of it, you start to get a picture and you start to build out a picture of your process that looks something like this. And at this stage, many organizations start to build out flow maps, right? And you have a map that's starting to lay out the different unit operations. Now, you may have SMEs on different teams that are, some covering the working bank, some covering the production culture. So they may be broken down into different areas, but ultimately they're working together. A tool like this can help stitch that together. Now, as you move past the definition phase, the next stage that's most likely relevant for you is you're going to start looking at control and failure modes, right? So you're going to start to break down how that process can work. And I'll stay on flow rate for a second, but now we'll start to outline, okay, where are the potential failure modes, right? Maybe the team's done some studies already, maybe you have that information, maybe you're doing them, but you're looking at the impact of these parameters to sort of justify these ranges and understand the impact. So we're building out that history of, okay, well, we know we have an impact on dissolved O2, as well as other parameters and quality attributes, and you're starting to build out those justifications that are ultimately going to go into later on a filing or be important for a transfer. So you can see here that we're starting to set up risk. We're starting to document next steps. We're using this as a tool to collaborate, and we can pull together something like an FMEA, which is a pretty critical and consistent asset that most teams are going to generate. And a lot of times the process for creating an FMEA is someone comes through and creates a spreadsheet, right? You come in and you create a spreadsheet based on some knowledge, but what we've done here is we've automatically laid that out for you. based on the information that you've already defined within the platform. So we have the capability to sort of cut down on rework and pull this together and let teams collaborate around the critical pieces of information that they need to, and look and focus in on, where they need to add more control in their process or where they need to look deeper, rather than spending their time, chasing down those pieces. So now we've done risk, you've set up our process, we've defined risk. We can also do some novel visualizations with that information. So I have here our risk map, which is sort of a look into that production culture unit operation. I've zoomed in on pH here, and now I'm showing, okay, well, pH is sort of impacted by base addition volume and disparaging, but it has this upstream effect over here. And I could see that, okay, I got to think about aggregates, I got to think about content. So here it's showing the relationships that are built out within my process and how that impacts my final product. And all of this information, again, is captured in one place and linked together. So there's a threads connecting those pieces. And some of that may be justified in other systems, which can then be used and connected into here to justify these relationships. So at this point, I've got a clear picture of my process. I've got my process defined. I've got my risk defined. I've got a little bit of my control strategy defined. The next step for me would be to build a document, right? And many teams can come together and spend a large amount of time started creating a process description, which is a typical artifact that's required at this stage. So here we're showing a process description here, and we're building this now within our Doc Builder platform, which is a structured content authoring tool that we can use to assemble this information. And Doc Builder has some very powerful capabilities to leverage via what we call smart content, the information within your project. So I can come in here and start to lay out in here the different fields, the different values of my parameters, for example, the ranges, et cetera. I can reference that information directly within a document structure. So I can build out a report that looks like this, that references the reports that we already saw, that uses the information that we've already defined. And in here, I can lay out some typical table structures showing, for example, a breakdown of each of the parameters, its risks, their failure modes, et cetera. And all of this can come together in a dynamic fashion where I can automatically generate a report from here. So now this data is just being pulled through. So we're saving tons of time for scientists that are maybe not repeating themselves by making this document. And oh, by the way, when I make this document 4 different times for 3 different audiences with slight variations, there's likely a high probability that there's some variance between that information. So here you're all building it from one knowledge source, which can help cut down on some of that loss. So that kind of wraps up a quick overview of some of the key concepts or key workflows in sort of digital process management. Of course, the next step here is really going after tech transfer, right? We talked about some of the times there. If I come back to this process for tech transfer, the next step for me is to document this and send it to my receiving site. Now, there's a lot of different ways that can happen. I just showed you a process description report, so that could be a key artifact to initiate a transfer. But either way, I have to send this over to my receiving site. Now that could be in-house, that could be, we could be just scaling up as a transfer. We can be going to a new site as a transfer. We can going out to a CDMO. There's a lot of different scenarios under which tech transfer can happen. But the key step is the receiving unit needs to take the information from the sending unit and build out that process. And how you can do that in our system is by simply taking this sending site, making a copy of it, and starting to define the changes in your receiving unit. So I'm gonna have to mimic the process of copying that receiving site. So now we set up our site here. Now this is not only a site change, but a scale up. So we've got to do some mass balance stuff. We also have to kind of plan out what the equipment changes are going to be. But now teams on the receiving site can come in and, using the same approach for digital process management, start to outline what are the changes that are going to be in this process based on the new site. And since I'm going up in size, I'm probably going to need a new bioreactor. So I'll be changing that. And some of the parameters associated with that scale up change are certainly going to have some impact. So we're going to need to look at some of those parameters and make some adjustments. So teams will start to adjust their process based on what they need in their specific site. And with that, we can come over and start the next part of that process, which is the assessment across those 2 sites. So now I'm just going to come in here and look at another tool that we have in the platform, which does effectively comparability of processes. So I'm going to look at my 500 liter to my 1,000, and I'm going to focus it again on this production culture step. And now I'm going to look at my components, so my equipment. And here I see that my bioreactor has in fact changed. I could see that there is a bit of risk in this process, right? I'm going through and I'm assessing that risk as a team, and I'm looking at maybe the parameters underneath that bioreactor that have changed. So I could see that the number of impellers, that my impeller design overall, my aspect ratio is changing as I'm scaling up. These are some of the harder parts of that upstream transfer. And yes, I need to go do some more studies, and I need to look at the risk of those, right? I need to assess what the risk is. And here I could see a comparison. I could see the certainty I have around that and start to execute along those ways. All along, you're going to be sort of using this as a tool to help guide you through the transfer, help you understand and solidify these changes. And if need be, you can ship this out to Excel and do it the old-fashioned way. Or what we also offer is the capability to, again, build a different report. And now I can come and build a gap assessment report if that's what my quality system needs, or if that's what I need to justify internally. I can come in here and start to outline what that might look like. Again, same concept here where we're building out the structure of the report. We have some preamble text that's germane to our organization, but then we're starting to pull out the key attributes that we need to showcase in this summary report, starting to connect them with our smart content back into the system. And now, I can quickly generate and start to pull together some of the reporting requirements, all connected to that digital transfer that I just did. Now, of course, as we look at this, there are some other steps involved. So, for example, we might need to start looking at validation or just the overall tech transfer protocol. So I might have another document here that's looking at that same thing. And very common in transfers is there's a lot of different documents that are created for different purposes that share a lot but slightly different information. And you can see here that we're going to create this transfer protocol, and it's going to have a different focus with some of the same information, but some different stuff. So you're going to see I'm going to go through and talk about who's involved, what are the personnel, what are the product quality attributes that I need to start thinking about as I'm going towards validation of this new process, et cetera. So you can start to see we're pulling in some of the product information, but it's all being connected back to the process information. And this is really enabling starting to fulfill those documentation requirements and reduce some of the burden there by connecting them, but ultimately towards the regulatory requirements that you need to have to justify that new site. Now, of course, that's more of the paper-based side of things. As Yash mentions, another more important area is how do we connect to the MES, assuming that you do have an MES. In certain cases, you might be producing a paper batch record or an electronic version of that, or a PDF-based batch record, in which case we're working to build that directly within the platform so you can build your batch record from the structure that you've already defined and the parameters that you already have. But we're also working towards and have done, which I'll show you in a minute with Syncade, a push button MES transfer. So how do we do that mapping where I can take this process and just ship it straight over to my MES? And that's where we'll go next as we think about these workflows. Today, it's in a document-based transfer. You're typically producing a bill of parameters, which, by the way, we can generate for you. But that's done. You capture that tech transfer information. A lot of work is done to approve that. Again, another concept that can be done in there. There's a huge lift for MSAT to kind of get this all together. There's a whole mapping exercise that goes into the MES, especially for existing MES systems that maybe have some parameterized setups. There's a validation approach that needs to happen for that. There's a dual entry for the setup side. And then ultimately there's the approval of that the setup is correct and accurate. And what we're going towards and can demonstrate now is that we can drastically reduce the amount of time involved here by just cutting that all off. We have an ISA 95 compliant export. We can send this data over. We have a mapping process whereby we can map the parameters into an existing parameterized recipe in a system like Syncade or others. And you can really cut down on all the time that's spent doing both the mapping and the data pulls, because you're going to have all that information. And oh, by the way, that's going to help out a lot with change management. As things start to change, you'll have that full compliant audit trail, and you could see that in one place, and you don't have to move around a bunch of documents, or if you do, they're push button to generate. That's a really exciting example and of where some of the power of these platforms can come to accelerate tech transfer. And as I mentioned earlier, as we see, and as some of the audience has reflected, it's a huge area of opportunity in the industry. There's a lot of collaboration. There's a lot of opportunity for digitization to save time by either cutting down on the overall transfer activities or ultimately just pushing stuff directly into those systems that are already digital. And if you're not digital, we can still help bridge those two worlds as well. So with that, I'm going to flip it back over to Yash to wrap us up.
Thanks, Luke. So I think a great job, showing our audience how you go about building this digital fabric, and how that fabric with underlying data structure, really powers automation in a way that's very concrete. And of course, when you're talking about deploying new solutions, one of the big questions is always going to be, what's the return on this investment? And we see the return really being broad-based, and over time. It starts with short-term ROIs to medium-term ROIs to long-term ROIs. But initially, you're starting by saving time, being able to structure and automate, work faster, find your information as you need it, have this information connected, building these smart content documents. Over time, as you build this capability and you build this structure, you can really accelerate to commercial a lot faster. So whether it's managing your process digitally, integrating with MES solutions digitally, and just being able to automate a lot of the reporting and information and knowledge transfer that's required as part of tech transfer, moving that away from a document-centric approach to a data-centric approach can be very, very powerful. It can save a lot of time and accelerate your activities. And of course, in the long term, building a vertically integrated knowledge base, making this institutional knowledge, enhancing your data integrity, it can really build long-term ROI, because you're defining a process. It's well-defined, it's robust in terms of its development, and it's well understood, with a lot of process intelligence as well, which will certainly increase the likelihood of technical success and regulatory approval. All right, so our third poll is, are you familiar with the FDA's CASA initiative? We'll wait a minute here for you all to answer, and then we'll talk a little about what that means and why that's important. All right, well, it looks like we have a number of folks who actually are familiar with CASA, and some folks who aren't. So let's talk a little bit about what's coming for the industry overall. I think we're talking a lot about what we think and the approaches that we think are important to building this digital fabric for automation. But even aside from what we think, there are a number of industry trends that are really driving everybody towards structured data, and these imperatives are gaining momentum. So it's not really a question anymore of if, but just a question of when your organization will move in this direction, because ultimately structured data is really critical to driving and building this knowledge base. And so you're seeing industry case studies, whether it's from Nimble or it's from ISP or others that are driving quality by design based CMC development. So they're really advocating this, especially for some of the new complex therapies that are out there. Reducing tech transfer times is a mandate in many organizations. I think it was something that got exposed a little bit during the pandemic, and people realized that they have to be able to get these times down from the 24 months that it takes today to sort of 3 to 6 months, and that can bring significant return on investment in doing so. There is still a lot of gaps between how information and development in the PD phase gets transferred into commercial manufacturing. And so there's more attention now being focused on how structured data can be integrated with process development and MES to really drive those activities and create and streamline them. There's really a need for unified platforms to address the data governance and data integrity gaps. So clearly regulatory agencies are focusing more on this. And they're also openly discussing now structured data and cloud-based submission. This is really where the CASA piece comes in. So you can see that there's a number of recent commentary and articles, and the FDA is really, and other agencies are really building their own structured data capabilities, and in many ways getting ahead of the industry on this. So I think there's going to be an expectation going forward that the industry catches up and really deploys their own structured data solutions to ultimately dovetail into what the regulatory agencies are looking for.
Awesome. Thank you, Yash. So with that, we're going to flip over to the Q&A section of the webinar. And we had a couple questions come in, but please feel free to use the Q&A button within Zoom. You can post anonymously or with your name. It's up to you. We will show the answers that are posted live here. And if there are sufficient number, we'll send out written responses as well where it's helpful. So Yash, I'm going to pose the first question that we got to you, and then I can chime in thereafter. But someone asked, if we want to move in this direction of constructing a CMC knowledge base, what are your recommendations for getting started?
Yeah, so in terms of ultimately building that digital fabric, we think that structuring data is probably the most important activity to start with. And so, whether you're structuring your primary data or your other data, you really have to build some sort of approach where data has a rich metadata construct around it, so that data is appropriately tagged. And once you do that, once you take data and put context around it with rich metadata, now you're really getting to information. And as you build information, you then get to knowledge, and knowledge over time turns into intelligence. So I think the goal really here should be to say, well, we really need to move away from document-centric approaches and more into content-centric approaches. And as we do that, and as we deploy and leverage structured data approaches, that's really your first step into constructing that digital fabric to ultimately build your CMC knowledge base.
That is awesome. Thank you. And the second question we got is, how do we implement this approach if we have a number of legacy projects in our organization? And I'll take a stab at that, and Yash, you can follow on as well. But it's actually not as hard as you may think. Certainly, similar to Yash was sort of saying there, it's all about picking a place to get started. So there's no harm in starting with a legacy project. In some cases, they're a little easier because they're not as in motion. But there are various tools that we can provide to help you get a historical project up into the system and start looking at that for annual reviews, or helping to APRs, any of those activities that may go on. So you can do sort of a post hoc conversion into a digital system, and then especially where that's connected to an MES, you could sort of look at how we could do change management or use the system to help do that, or if there's updates to batch record, using the system like this to help manage and connect those changes. So there are tons of opportunities for legacy projects, and they don't have much difference other than there's not a lot of initial collaboration around the development side, but there will be as they move forward in the future. And that can be really useful, because another part of this that we didn't really talk about in this webinar is having a knowledge base. So you may want to start to look across those pieces. So you may want to understand, well, if I got 30 different commercial MABs out there, what do I know about them? What do I know about my CQA ranges, right? I have got a lot of prior knowledge, and that's an important part of the justification of this. So that information will be incredibly important, maybe not for looking at holistically as you go to launch your next project, or to have that institutional knowledge codified somewhere. So great question. We have another one here. Will you be sharing a link to the webinar? Yes, we will. Following this conversation, we will send out an email, probably a day or so after, just to give us some time to process it and get it ready. We will share a link to the webinar. We'll also make it live. I think typically our patterns are to put this up on our website and make it visually available on YouTube. So you'll be able to do that. And you can also browse past webinars that we've had on different topics. Okay.
Do we have any other questions from the audience that we can answer? Oh, looks like we got one more here. Yes. How do you establish controls and CFR compliance for data and parameters that are inputted and not pulled from an MES? I'll go ahead and take that. So first of all, for CFR compliance, QbDVision is a 21 CFR Part Club, CFR Part 11 compliant solution. And so what we do is we treat each one of our digital objects, if you will, just like you would, like a document is treated in the QMS world. So each digital object has a, you can route it for approval, electronic signatures, which are all compliant with 21 CFR Part 11. And there's a full audit trail. So every time a change is made to a record, that's recorded, who did it, when, the timestamp, so on and so forth. And so that's how we manage the controls and CFR compliance for this data. And then you have all your reports and everything that you can pull from that. But you can see things that are in approved form, things that may still be in draft form, and so it still is compliant with all of those requirements.
Awesome. And while we're waiting for any more questions, I'll give a shameless plug. As you can see here, if you enjoyed this conversation, we are having our second annual Digital CMC Summit in Austin, Texas, right around Halloween time. We had our first one last year, and it was great. A lot of like-minded professionals, and not just us, but customers, partners, and sponsors, all really getting together and trying to push the envelope on how all this stuff works together. I think a big focus of the summit last year and again this year is, hey, we live in an interconnected world. We live in a world where all these systems must talk together. How do we get there together? And how do we partner? And actually, a lot of what we've talked about today came out of that summit last year, where we got a lot of ideas, a lot of different vendors, MES and otherwise, coming together to talk about that with our customers to sort of get a plan for how to go together. So we're really excited for this year. We'll have some to show. Some of our other vendors will have some stuff to show, and we're really excited for the collaboration and where we go next with this. So there's a QR code here. There's information on our website, but if you can make it down this fall, it's an excellent opportunity to really dive into this topic. Okay, so there's no more questions in just yet. Josh, why don't you take us home and close us out?
Yeah, so thank you all for joining today. We really appreciate your time, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with many of you, whether it's via our social media channels, whether it's directly or in person at our Digital CMC Summit this November. So hope you all have a great week, and we look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you.